He inspired us, entertained us, educated us. Canada's spaceman, Commander Chris Hadfield, delivered us a view of the world that left a lasting impression and helped launch a new generation of astronauts. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, that's a real complimentary thing to say. I hope I did help launch a generation of astronauts. It'd be great if that works out.
I think so. I think that so much of the work that you did that we were following so closely when you were actually in space, and then everything that you do, whether it's the creative destruction project you're involved in, whether it is the speaking engagements, we were just talking before we switched the cameras on. I don't know how you keep up. You do more traveling around the world than you did in space, I think.
It seems that way, yeah.
But those speeches, I think, are really pushing people and young people towards science, towards a career as an astronaut, careers just working in lab coats, and it's fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's really important, having been lucky enough to do the things that I did, to try and let other people in on how that happened, but also then how maybe they could do things they're dreaming of. When I sort of look back at the stuff that's happened, it's surreal, but it's actually is the things that I had a chance to do, and so it's nice to reaffirm to other people that impossible things happen. Well,
let's go way back then and talk about how you got interested in all of this. Reading An Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth, you talk about science fiction. You loved science fiction stories growing up. What was it about science fiction? And do you think that's where the seed of all of this was planted?
Absolutely. I mean, when you're, 7 years old or even 5 years old, you don't live in the real world.
That's right.
You know, it's like Calvin and Hobbes, right? You know, Hobbes is just a stuffed tiger, but for Calvin, that's a real living being, and there's no question. And so fiction, imagination, art, the permission to picture things that don't exist for real. I grew up on a farm, you know, heavy workload, school, then working on the farm, and the escape of the possibilities seemed endless. First in books, you know, reading Asimov and Heinlein and Edgar Rice Burroughs and Jules Verne and stuff, just fantastic stuff. Mysterious Island, more science than science fiction. But then Star Trek, you know, Star Trek, wow, we'd been watching Bonanza, and suddenly here's Bonanza set in space, you know? And then 2001, I went to see that Kubrick movie with, as one of my friend's birthday party when we were about, 8.
Yeah.
And as
you must not have understood a second
well,
of
I
it.
still don't understand a second of it, but it's still, when I watch that, it just helps me imagine things that otherwise I would never go down with my head. But all of that was in parallel, that mind expansion was in parallel to the reality of spaceflight, of Gagarin and then Al Shepard and Alexei Leonov for a spacewalk, and then Neil and Buzz walking on the moon. And so to have the juxtaposition of fantasy and actual reality, it's like, what if Spider-Man and Superman suddenly, wow, they're real, and I could maybe do that. And that's what really turned the light on for me, was that this isn't just science fiction. This is a thing that other people are doing, and they're going to be Canadians doing this. And if you change who you are, then maybe you could be one of the people doing these things. So it kind of set the path for me when I was 8, 9 years old.
But the odds of it actually happening for you in those days must have been fairly slim, don't you think?
I think they were zero, because there was no Canadian astronaut program, no Canadian rockets, no Canadian Space Agency. There was no end game. You know, there was nobody I could write my letters to, you know, but I figured, hey, when Neil and Buzz were my age, and Yuri and Alexei, they didn't have anybody to write to either, and look what they did. It's the only thing that I could count on was that things were going to change, and that if I didn't change who I was, then there was no way I was going to fly in space. So why not shape who you are in pursuit of what you dream, and at the same time earning a living, doing things that sort of drag your life that direction. But incredibly enough, at the end of all that, I flew in space 3 times and did spacewalks that are on the $5 bill and commanded a spaceship. It seems surreal, but all those things have happened.
When you got up there, was it the way you imagined it would be?
That's a really cool question, because I actually had in the back of my mind, I was like, what if I get there and I don't like it? Like, you know, it's like drinking wine. You know, wine has so much mystique, and everyone talks about it. And I'm sure there are some people that take their first sip of wine and go, that's what it tastes like? Really? I was expecting something different. And there are some people who fly in space, and one flight is enough for them. The amount of work and the stress and the danger of it. But for me, when I was that little boy dreaming of it, and you know, with a flashlight reading those science fiction books, it was better than I dreamed it would be. The combination of doing something that was really hard that I dreamed of having the whole world silent and whipping by in the window, and having a superpower being weightless. I mean, if you could snap your fingers and make that happen again, I'd go with you in a heartbeat. It's a great experience.
And seeing 16 sunrises a day, right?
Yeah, you go around the world in 90 minutes. So if you know 24 hours, 90 minutes, that means 16 times around a day. And they happen fast. You know,
really?
You're in the darkness, but you're coming around the world forcing the sunrise. And so it goes from the complete darkness of light, and then it's like someone just dumps a rainbow on the horizon like a liquid, and bam, up comes the sun, and there's another sunrise. And every 90 minutes you get one of those. And the heat of the sun, because there's nothing stopping those sun rays except you know, 1 or 2 panes of thick plastic, and it's on your face. So it's an amazing place to be, and you get reminded every 90 minutes how amazing it is.
Was that, you talk about the sunlight coming through and you feel it on your face, was that the connection to the earthbound life that you had left behind, the sort of the pleasure? We can walk outside and feel the sun on our face. You couldn't do that up there, but was it a way of I don't know, reminding yourself of what life on Earth was like?
No, actually, the sunrises and sunsets, they were more like watching a painting be created in front of you. What really tied you to home was seeing all 7.5 billion people every day, because the world turns underneath you.
Yeah.
So you see everybody. You look down and go, oh, look, there's Karachi, whatever, 9 million people.
Yeah.
Holy cow. And 10 minutes later, you know, you're coming over, whatever, Singapore. And you wait 40 minutes, and now you're over San Francisco. And the whole world and everybody in it, and all of what we think are so wildly different cultures, and, you know, we pretend we're so radically different from each other. When you see the whole thing in 90 minutes, you realize this is one little shared, if you can go around it in 90 minutes, it can't be very big, right? Like, you know, if you can drive across something in 90 minutes, you can run for 90 minutes, you know? And so the world is not very large. And I think that's what really tied me back, was having that constant reminder of the life there and how joined it is.
Is it difficult to come back? You know, we hear stories about astronauts who have been to space, and then everything on Earth seems a little, I've been to space.
I think maybe we do our best to make spaceflight look inevitable,
right,
when in fact it's really, really hard, incredibly dangerous. My first spaceflight, the odds of dying in launch, the first 8.5 minutes were 1 in 38. You know, we did it 38 times, would have killed everybody. But we try and make it look like, well, of course this is happening.
Yeah.
And the only way we do that is by working so hard at it for years and years and years and years. But I think we sort of give the impression that we're like, doo-ba-doo-ba-doo, and then wham, there's this huge space flight and then nothing afterwards. When instead, it's this enormous crest of life that continues for decades. And the space flight was just like the magical 6 months in the midst of a tremendous 20-year period. So no, for me, it just informed my life better, I think. Like if you'd never seen, I don't know, the color red in your whole life, and then somebody showed you red, and from now on you could see red, it's not like life is worse now or something. Right. It's just added a depth of understanding to the colors of the world around you. And to me, that's what the experience did.
During your command on the ISS, education was very important to you. You were very active on social media. We knew what was happening, but it was all about education. Was that one of your mandates, or was it a personal mandate?
Both. Well, of course, for the space agency, they are one of the main scientific bodies within Canada, along with, you know, Scientific and Engineering Research Council and some of the various other things the government does. We need people to be aware of how things work. You know, if you look at a city like Toronto, the complexity of the science and engineering that allows all of us to live here in such sort of carefree comfort doesn't happen automatically. Right. It happens because of people understanding all of the complexity. But you have to inspire people. And I'm lucky enough to have done a job that just by sort of its very nature, the rarity of it and the distance of it, it catches people's attention. If I sit next to someone on a bus and we're like, hey, look out the window, and so what do you do? I'm an astronaut. All normal conversation stops,
absolutely.
right? You know, if I'd said I'm an engineer, a tax accountant, or whatever, like that. And so, so therefore, there's a responsibility comes with the job. And I already been an astronaut for 20 years when I went up for my third space flight, the long one on the space station. So I sort of knew what everybody on the bus wanted to talk about.
Right.
And I worked really hard when I was supposed to be asleep. I would steal 1 or 2 hours every night. When my schedule said sleep, I would go, I'll sleep later. Let's try and get one more video cranked out of what this means. And use the beauty and the allure and the science fiction aspects of it to get people to maybe understand a little more clearly the universe around us.
Were you aware of the impact that you were having?
Well, sort of remotely, you know. There's no, you know, I'm a musician as well, and when you play in front of an audience, while you're playing, you could be, there's no sound from the audience, but at the end there's applause. In space, you do all this, there's no applause, but you're still aware that there's an audience. And but mostly I was just trying to use all the time to create content, because I knew I'd have the rest of my life to sort of decide. I took thousands of pictures, 45,000, then eventually published a book of like what it would be like to go around the world with me, or collecting the ideas, or writing music, trying to soak up the idea and then record it as many ways as I could, so that I had multimedia ways of playing it back for myself and other people the rest of my life.
Which you use in the generator shows.
Oh, yeah.
And so you've taken this extraordinary experience, which there's only a handful of people on the planet have had, and you filtered it through music and word and comedy and everything else, and you do these shows, which again, I think, push people towards science in a way that certainly, if that had been around when I was a kid, I'd be an astronaut too right now.
Yeah, the generator show, I think I worked closely with my son Evan for many years on this, and he's doing the whole show this year, January 10th at Roy Thompson. But it's not, you know, there's science, but it's comedy and music and people, and sort of getting to know the people. Someone like Moshe Safdie, or we had 5 people in exoskeletons, people that were quadriplegic. And as one of the guys says, hey, at last I can be a stand-up comic, because he's wearing this exoskeleton, and technology enabling people to do better and to create things. And so the generator show has been a lot of fun to put together, and I think it gets ideas into the brains of the audience that they otherwise might not have.
Do you still think like an astronaut?
I believe I do. I'm very clinical about risk prioritization, preparing for events. I mean, I recently winterized my cottage, and I don't know how other people winterize the cottage, but I kind of winterize a cottage like an astronaut. I think, you know, there's a list of dangers and risks, and then there's ways to mitigate those risks, and then there's actions that have to follow, and then there's ways to double check afterwards that you've done those actions, and then you report it, and then you keep a checklist for next year so that you don't miss the steps next year. And I sort of approach everything like that, flying with the snowbirds, or flying my own airplanes, you know, where people let me fly an airplane, or whatever. I sort of treat everything as an interesting task with a certain amount of risk and danger, with some sort of end game, and the real question is, can I change myself to be able to do this thing, so it now just increases the number of things that I'm skilled at in my life.
Would you go up again?
Oh yeah, if you're offering, and you ought to also. To be able to fly in space, to see the world that way, to take our first steps away from the planet, it's a toddler learning to walk. It's someone who's never been able to see properly suddenly putting on great glasses, or someone who's never been able to paint suddenly being given brush and easel and canvas. It's a whole new capability that we've just imagined or said was beyond us. And from walking to flight to space flight is a magnificent arc, and I've been lucky enough to ride it all the way to orbiting the planet.
Commander Hadfield, what a pleasure.
Nice to talk
Thank you
with you.
very much.
Thanks.